That happens sometimes as I get talking. So now's your chance to leave. If you don't want to be recorded, other than Debbie, you can't. You have to stay. But we're going to record this. When we're done, I will get this up at our website, ncdea.us. So if you had anybody that you know who was unable to attend, they will be able to watch the replay. Probably early next week it will be posted, depending on how the rest of my week goes. We also post them to our YouTube channel, so you can check it out there as well. So welcome. We have been doing these monthly for almost 2 years now, with great success and interest from employees. So it's always exciting to see everyone show up monthly for these. We do them on a variety of topics. This month, we're talking about telling your district story and how you can really share what you're doing and talk to people about your conservation district. Next month, we have a great couple of folks from Michigan joining us to talk about some innovative programs that they are doing there to engage their community in slightly different ways in different types of landowners. So looking at backyard habitat certifications. So plan to join us in June for that exciting installation of professional development. So today, like I said, we're talking about telling your district story, and we are thrilled to have Debbie Hughes. She's the executive director of the New Mexico Association of Conservation Districts and a seasoned veteran in the conservation district world. So, Debbie, I will let you kind of give your own intro. For everyone who's here, you'll notice you can't interact with us by speaking, but there is a Q&A box. If you don't see it on the bottom of your screen, click the three dots that say more, and it should pop up there. You'll see the Q&A. You can type your questions in there. Feel free to type them in as we're going. And I will interject or we'll get them answered at the end with Debbie and go through them all. So with that, Debbie, the floor is yours.
Great. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I am Debbie Hughes. Excuse me. My husband and I had a ranch in southeast New Mexico. It's about 70 miles from the nearest town where we raised our 3 sons, and our middle son and his family is now running the ranch. But I started out as a board member. I was recruited, I think, when USDA was trying to diversify and they needed some females involved. So the DC drove clear out to our ranch while we were shearing, and when it asked if I would be on the board, and a conservation district board, and I said, "What's that?" So there's kind of where I started. Was on the board for 10 years, local board, got involved with the state association, was fixing to move up as president, and I was doing everything for free, basically. And we decided to hire a person, which was only going to be about $25,000. Then you got to come up with the rest of it, find, grants and all this stuff. So I applied, not thinking it was going to be 30 years later. But of course, if you work with conservation districts and your state associations, these are the people are the salt of the earth, farmers and ranchers, and so it is a joy getting to work with them. So I think when Jennifer first talked to me, she was like, "How do you talk about the district or your state association in 2 to 4 minutes? How do you get a short, And I also do the lobbying for my state association at the state level, as well as in DC. So I've had a lot of practice with the 2 to 4 minute speeches. And I guess, the first thing is introduce yourself. If they don't know you, make sure they know who you're representing. And you've really, in 2 to 4 minutes, you got to pretty quickly get to what you're asking for. What are you wanting? What are you interested in? I'm trying to change a law, get some funding, tell them about a problem. And then if it's a vote, ask them, tell them you'd appreciate their vote. Even if they're from a party and whatever the issue is, they won't vote for it. That's also good information to know when you're trying to count votes in a committee or something like that. So when I first started out, we have 30-day sessions in Santa Fe and 60-day sessions. And so from the beginning, we've rented either hotel rooms, or now we rent a couple of condos, because I have 2 past presidents that also come up and help me. And one of my past presidents Thought he was a little rancher in a little town, found out he was former military, but didn't know much about him. Um, Later, I learned that, I mean, because I thought, man, this guy, he must read a lot of books or travel a lot or something, because any country, any food, whatever he talked about, this guy knew something about it. Come to find out, he was a counterintelligence officer, had worked all over the world. And when we started having this conversation, we've been up there working together the whole session. We're walking back to our office, and he goes, "You'd make a good spy." I said, "What?" Like, oh my goodness, what are you talking about? And he said, "Well, what we do up here is basically what I did my entire career. We meet people, we form relationships, and then we try to get the information or accomplish the goal that we have by doing this." He said, "It's no different." And so in the beginning, man, I was dead set on, I've got to talk to that that legislator. I've got to talk to that congressman. So important to sit here for hours and wait for them. I quickly learned that's not really the case. If you're trying to talk to a legislator or anybody else that you're trying to tell a story and they have a secretary, remember, they're the doorkeeper. They are the key to getting your message delivered and possibly getting an appointment to talk to that person. And so once you realize the value of those secretaries or staffers that people work with, you figure out pretty quickly that forming relationships with them is just as important as forming relationships with that elected official. And for example, I frequently get emails from our senators asking questions, wanting something, wanting us to set up a tour in New Mexico, like whatever. And so I guess the most important word I can say for today is relationship, because everything we do in the conservation district world is about relationships. And somebody that may be an employee today may be a senator tomorrow. And we've actually seen, I had a gentleman this year at the legislative session that was a staffer I worked with that was drafting a bill with me for watershed districts. And I had met him 25 or 30 years ago in DC when he was a staffer for a senator. Now he's back in New Mexico working for our legislature. So just remember that. One of the best ways to build relationships with folks is social events, or here in New Mexico in the interim, which is, between the regular session, we will still have monthly meetings. The legislators will have monthly meetings, and usually they're 2 or 3 days. If you're able to attend and go to a dinner or put on a tour, I guess tours are the other thing I would say is probably the best thing you can do, because you can try to explain what districts do. You can try to get really nice brochures and handouts and everything else, but taking them out on the ground is the best thing you can do. And then also your constituents, your board members, your members of the conservation district, having them talk directly to these legislators out on a tour, pretty much justifies what you're doing. And then one thing I would say for sure is, if you're asked a question, don't make up the answer. If you don't know, tell them, "I don't know, I will get back to you." Probably the one and only the main thing you have, at least as a lobbyist, but representing your district or your state association, is your reputation. And you don't want your reputation to be, well, they told me something that it wasn't true. Because if you give them the wrong information and then that elected official or whoever repeats it and it's not correct information, it just makes everybody look bad. So don't be afraid to say, "I don't know." But you really have to learn how to not be afraid to go up as they're walking down the hall, "Senator so-and-so, Representative so-and-so, may I have a minute?" And be prepared to just walk with them wherever they're going, walk with them down the stairs. I do think that it's best to catch them not on the way to the restroom, but maybe on the way out of the restroom is a better place to catch them, actually. So you're going to sometimes only have those short minutes. And I know in New Mexico, if for example, they're on the floor and you need to talk to them, you need to always have your business card with you, so that staff can take it in and, hopefully you've already established some relationship where they think you're important enough to come out and talk to. But again, I just say it's all about relationships. I have a daughter-in-law, I have three daughter-in-laws actually, and they're just wonderful. One of them cannot tell a story in less than 20 minutes about anything. She could not be a lobbyist. You have definitely got to be able to introduce yourself, make your point, and ask for whatever you want, basically. And if you can't do that, you need to practice. Maybe practice on your husband, your grandkids, kids, whatever. But just make sure you're doing that. Sarah, I didn't put together a PowerPoint or anything because I wanted to make sure there was plenty of time for questions, if there is any questions. But basically, I wanted to let you know that it's all about relationships, and you want to be able to have their cell phones. You want to be able to talk to them offline, besides just when you're in a certain meeting. And the more you can build on those relationships, the better off you are. I know when we go to DC, we always, instead of just asking for everything, we also ask staffers or what can we do for you? If you come to New Mexico, if you would like to have a meeting with producers, or if you would like to have a tour, please let us know. And we very often get asked to do that because we've offered. So it is really important to try to do this. So Sarah, so you got one question maybe.
Yeah. So I think a couple of things. So the question is about how do you know who to talk to, right? Like what if you're brand new to it. I think a lot of district employees, especially, maybe aren't as active in some of those things as far as and kind of riding that fine line between lobbying and providing information and outreach. And so how do you make sure that you're getting to the right people and figuring out who you should be talking to, especially for, those of us that live in very large states, maybe you're not close enough to be there every day, or things like that. And then what is some important information to share? What if you don't really have a specific ask, like we're not really looking for funding, or we don't have something specific, but we really want to be on the radar, so if something does come up, we're in the forefront of, oh yeah, districts do this, let's get with them to talk about it, and becoming a trusted information source.
That is a great question. So I'll focus down to the district level. So all of you have elected officials of some kind, whether they be county commissioners, whether they be, you're elected. So when they're home, if there's a way to invite them for coffee, I mean, always invite them to board meetings, but sometimes they don't want to go to another board meeting. But what I have found very effective in New Mexico is those districts who do a newsletter, and they make sure that it goes to the legislators as well as their producers. Then when you're talking to them, a lot of them, kind of know who they are if they read the mail. Hopefully they do. But that, it depends. Who you're talking to really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. If you're trying to get, more funding from the county, go to the county commission meetings, meet them all, try to, get to know them at the local level. If there's anybody in your hometown, or if some of your board members have certain relationships with them, sometimes they can be the in. I know as far as the legislature, I think we had about 30 new ones this year. You don't really focus all your time on trying to run around and make sure you know every single one of them. It would be great if we had the time. But let's say your bills are going through an ag committee and a conservation committee. That's going to be who you're focusing on. You're going to be focusing on those who have the vote. If you're if you're in a conservation district, it's not something political, but you still want to tell them about your district. Like I said, invite them to tours. Everything you can do to reach out to them locally. They appreciate it. I mean, when they're educated at home, that gives them more knowledge whenever they go up the ladder too. So make everything local. Start with local.
Absolutely. And I think most states, as far as like how do you figure out who your representative is or your congressional delegation, most states I think have that information online where you can go to your state website and find your legislators, and it'll list out all their contact information
Right.
to reach out directly. I don't know that, like, I can speak for North Dakota. They don't list out aides, but they list the contact for the legislators, so you can touch base with them.
Right.
So I think that's a good place to start if
Definitely.
you're
And
brand
we
new.
our legislators didn't have staff except during the session until now. So now they are going to have somebody you could reach out to at the local, but we have never in the past. When you mentioned the website, if I was interested in what an ag committee is doing in the interim, or conservation committee, or even what a certain legislator is doing, go to those websites. In New Mexico, everything is online. You can watch every committee, you can watch the full house sessions, like everything from your computer. So learn how to use that web page, because you can look up bills, you can look up, all the folks. And in New Mexico now, you can just put your address, but Find My Legislator, you put your address, it directly tells you who's your senator and who's your rep, if you don't know. And in some cases, a lot of people don't know if they haven't worked with them. So definitely take advantage of that website.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good resource too if you're not local. Like if there is something that your districts are following, whether it's funding or it's changes to various laws that may affect district operations, the website is great. We have that capability in North Dakota as well, that we can watch all of the hearings, you can watch the floor sessions, you can go back if you missed them and they archive them so you can search by day. And so that's a really great resource too, just to keep up on things.
Definitely.
Um, so I think, let's see, there was a couple questions about like what kind of information. So if you are talking to someone maybe who is opposed to conservation districts or opposed to increasing funding or just kind of unaware maybe, what do you tell them? What's a generic message? Like what would be the high points you might use to share in that kind of 3 to 4 minute elevator pitch of here's why we're important?
Okay, so 20 years ago, it was kind of like now. There was a lot of conservation money, but the feds said no staff. And that's when they first created the TSP program. And the TSP program has worked different in different states. Our state conservationist said, if you go get money from the state, I'll match it 1-to-1. And we can set up this program in New Mexico, which is not what most states have done. But so we were about to lose out. We had been running this bill, we needed about $1 million. We had like $70,000. Finally, and this is kind of a funny story, but finally I needed to get in to talk to the governor. I knew there was a social event. We were able to get on as a co-sponsor with a little bit of money with the universities and go to it. Didn't really need to talk to the governor, but needed to talk to like the chief of staff. Caught him as he's coming out of the restroom at this event, and tell him, look, we've got $1 million of federal money and it will create jobs in rural areas to help with conservation on the ground. Well, our governor at the time had been a congressman, so he did understand farm bill programs. He basically said, be in the governor's office at 9 in the morning. This was 2 days before the end of the session. Then they're like, okay, do you have a bill going anywhere? I said, yeah, it's over in Senate Finance, but it's nothing to do with that. And they're like, doesn't matter. We'll just do a committee substitute. We basically got that almost $1 million within the last day and a half, just by delivering that quick message. Like I said, it was quick. And it was around jobs, natural resource improvements, helping deliver the farm bill. We still have that funding going 20 years later, and we still match it state and federal money. And so I think that's always a good message to talk about the jobs and the work that conservation districts do in rural areas and how you can help create those jobs. I have not found anybody who's against conservation on either party. Conservation broadly, they may envision it different ways. They may want climate change or green energy, but what I've learned in the 30 years, it's all the same thing we're already doing. We just have different buzzwords that we use in different administrations. It does not change necessarily the practices we're doing on the ground. So go with the flow. You can use their terms for whichever administration. I mean, we have a program that went on for over 20 years called Restore New Mexico, and it worked so well. It was BLM funding, and we were matching it with NRCS funding and all this. Anyways, every time we were change administration, we're like, oh no, it's going to go away. We would go to DC and we would say, like in the first Trump administration, I said, I don't care what you call it. It doesn't have to be Restore New Mexico. It can be Make New Mexico Great Again. I don't care, but don't do away with this program. We tell them all what it does, and show them. Pictures are great. If you only have a few minutes, too, pictures, 1 or 2 pictures of the project. You can't get them out on the ground is always great too. So I don't know if that answered that question, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it does. I think it's really important that when we're just talking about like what is the information, it's important to say who you are. It's very important that they know where you're coming from, right? And then I think depending on the audience, if you're looking at a county commission, if you're looking at a state legislature, that you're really talking about the district mission to serve people, right? Like you said,
Yes,
Debbie, we don't
definitely.
care what you call it. We just want to put conservation on the ground. We want to help our landowners, our producers do better.
That's right.
And we want to be able to provide them the most professional technical support and access to programs that we can. And I think those are the high points that you hit when you're talking to somebody about your district. And then you can dive in to, my district, we have like a rack card, it's like a half page printed that we hand out to folks who maybe are new in the community or new people who stop in that we have some pictures on there that shows, hey, we do education, we do outreach, we do conservation planning, we have, technical and financial assistance available, and kind of just that really high 10,000-foot overview of what we do that is able to get us that opening to start to talk about things, right? And I think that's important if you're brand new to kind of just visiting with folks. And then you start to, like you said, build those relationships, and then you can dive into the specifics. Like, hey, while I have you, now that you know who I am and what I do, this funding would be really great. Or this would be, we'd love to give you more information on XYZ. And so I think that those are really key things that are across the board. It doesn't really matter who you're talking to, right? It could be at the national level. You could be talking to your congressional delegation. You could be talking to a new person in your district. Kind of the same info. It's really talking about the good that we do, and that
Yep.
the great thing about conservation is it is nonpartisan. Like we
It is
just
nonpartisan.
want to do better for everybody. We don't care. Like you said, we don't care what you call the program.
Yeah, and you've got to be prepared to swing with the party. If you're going to actually use different terminology probably when you're talking to. I've got all Democratic legislators right now in DC. None of them like Trump. They don't want to have anything to do with him. They think he's terrible. You just got to stay away from the partisan politics and get them to focus on the actual on the ground work. I have some legislators, for example, that we're doing a huge project from Calf Canyon Hermes Peak Fire, and got a couple of $1 million from the state. It's actually federal money, but it's going on the ground. And so when I get an update from my contractors, I send it directly to the senator. And then when I was at a meeting last week where the very first interim committee, they asked us to present. We were one of the first organizations that was on the agenda, and which that was great. That shows how well we've gotten at doing partisan politics in New Mexico, because we're about 75% Democrats in the legislature, probably. So, but you got to remember, it's not about politics at all. And sometimes you have to twist your message a little bit, because some of our meetings at the same time, we go over and meet with Interior or Ag or some of the other agencies, and they're new people that are just brought in by the Trump administration, but you still tell them the good work you do and how successful and how important the Farm Bill is, no matter what they want to call it or what they want to call the programs. But thanks, Sarah.
Absolutely. I think that's a key message takeaway for everyone is you focus on the positive work that we do and the
Yep.
impact that it has on the landscape and to our farmers, ranchers, landowners, your customers that come into the office. So, let's see, there was a question specific to the TSP program that you mentioned in New Mexico. Do you want to just touch briefly on what that is for folks?
Sure, love to. Thank you. for the question. Ours is probably a little different than some states. The uh, the money runs through our land grant university because our Department of Ag is under them. So, and then the Soil Water District's funding comes through our Department of Ag. So the state funding goes there. Then the feds have an agreement like with the university, with the Department of Ag, and we still have a commission here too. So they're also involved. But then they let it out for bid. It has to be an RFP because we're a nonprofit, and they did not want to have 47 districts, which is what we have, 47 different agreements. But what we do is our state association bids on it, gets the funding, and then we have hired the biggest amount of staff. You can ask anybody from Mexico that we have are retired NRCS. That's how we're so successful. So we were able to grab up 20 something years ago. I think he's in his 80s, but he's still helping as a human resource officer. The person that retired, who was the administrator and the contract guy for NRCS. So he still works for us. So he manages this program. He looks at the resumes. We advertise. He gets a resume, see who's qualified. And then it's actually the local level, the conservation district and the DCs in the office that hire who they want, because that's where they're going to be working. So we place these people in these NRCS offices to help with Farm Bill. But because they are half funded by the state, they're also supposed to help with district work. Now, how that balance works, it's different in all districts. Depends on if they already have a lot of other full-time staff or part-time staff or whatever. But it is very local. And then the only other thing that we handle is the payroll for them. We actually have a payroll company that we have. So yeah, it's a little different than some of them, but the local district is actually, and then as part of that, I guess I should go on to say that's for the employees. We still have part of the money that's used for actually contractors and a lot of them were retired NRCS. When NRCS is like desperately needing more help and they can't hire, like right now, they'll use a lot of these retired guys that are half funded by state, half by the federal through the same agreement. And then the other piece that we do with it, well, two more pieces. We also pay for and do archaeological clearances. We hire the private companies that are approved by the state and everything. NRCS tells us we need them over in this ranch or whatever. I think at some point we had 11 different private contractors, but we do that as well. And then of course that archaeologist sends a report to the state NRCS archaeologist, who then has to sign off on it or ask for an amendment or whatever. And then the other piece that we have is we had some districts that just didn't have any money, but they needed part-time staff, and they actually wanted to learn how to do the payroll, and they wanted to learn so we have what's called district capacity. And so if a district wants to pay for 1 or 2 days of this person, so they're theirs, and yet the rest of it they'd work for NRCS, we do what's called district capacity. So they hire somebody, they set the rate, and all we do is reimburse them. They send us, what the cost was for that month, and we reimburse them. So it's going on 21 years here in New Mexico, and it's worked very well.
That's awesome. And just, there was a question. TSP is a technical service provider.
Yes.
So NRCS allows them to become conservation planner certified and then have some job approval authorities depending on how the state works, to be able to do conservation planning and walk through contracting and applications and things like that. And every state is a little different in how they work, but the program is a nationally supported program through NRCS. Yeah. So that's an awesome way to kind of expand your services and support staff without necessarily maybe having each district supporting those staff or trying to figure out how to do that.
Right.
So,
and just to add to that, I think I told you before we started, we were able to get $9 million this year. So around $3 million a year is going to be available. And what it's for is for district staff, district capacity, district contractors. So for example, one area, Southwest New Mexico, this extremely well-liked district conservationist just took the early retirement. We had 54 leaving New Mexico, so that's huge. But anyways, so these 3 districts are pooling their money, whatever they can get out of this $3 million a year, and they are hiring that retired NRCS guy to be a staff for all three of those districts. So all three of them are coming up with, okay, we really want noxious weeds. We need a grant writer to manage these programs. So this guy's going to get to do all that. He's going to be working with the same producers that he helped as an NRCS employee. And we're really excited about that. We also have already picked up a couple more that came to work directly for NMACD when they retired to help us with different things. So please look at those former NRCS people, because they're trained, they're educated, they've got all these relationships in your state that are so valuable. And I can't say enough about trying to use those folks if they're willing and want to work a little bit. So
Absolutely. And I think a lot of districts across the country are starting to look at sharing employees too, and, sharing the burden of that expense to hire those folks to
yeah,
do, whether it's watershed level planning or some other, conservation unit that they can do that kind of larger scale planning with. So that's always a great way. I think I've seen it in other districts too, where they share an education person that's available to 2, 3, 4 districts, depending on the size and location and things like that. So that kind of goes into, there's a question about just some funding sources, and that is the great thing, but also the challenging thing is that every state is very different in how we're organized as districts, how we receive funding. Some districts are able to, levy property taxes or other types of taxing authority. Some districts receive funding at a state level through an appropriation, which is fantastic. And I think is ties into kind of the telling your story and getting out there and talking to folks. There's lots of grants. There's ways to do agreements, Debbie, like you just talked about with NRCS or BLM or the U.S. Forest Service, depending on where you're located. So I would say, like, from my standpoint, be open to looking for a lot of different partners. We just had our webinar last month. We talked about grants and getting partners that maybe are a little bit different, whether it's maybe an economic development council in your area or a chamber of commerce or a veteran farmers group. Uh, and reaching out to some of those maybe non-traditional partners to see about funding and partnering, and being able to support staffing sometimes or projects. So I don't know if you have any wisdom on just kind of looking at grants or some ideas that are out there, for folks to try and pay for some of these things, because
sure,
that always seems to be the limiting
sure.
factor. Everyone
So
wants to
yeah,
do great things, but
yeah, of
money
our
is the
47 districts, every one of them's funding is different. I will
Yep.
say, when I first started almost 30 years ago, they were getting $2,000 from the state. I think we got that up to 5, and then finally to 10 and 15, and over, every 2 or 3 years, we would try to get some more money if that was a good year that the state had money, which we have a lot of oil and gas here, so that helps. But yeah, so then we got them up to almost 18,000. And then, like I was telling you earlier, last year we were able to get them all almost 80,000. The issue was that now, when we look back, don't just hand them money without them having a budget and an idea how they're going to spend it. Because we had a lot of districts stick it in the bank, in the savings account. That's not good accountability for tax dollars. So what I recommend, well, I'll just give some examples. What you said, the districts do all of the above. About half of them have mill levies, but in a very rural area, very poor counties, they can have a full mill levy and bring in $1,200 for the year. On the other hand, Albuquerque, who was a district that was almost dissolved 25 years ago, and we saved them, just passed a mill levy tax, 80% approval, and they're going to be getting out $6 million a year. And so they went from being poor, but they were good. They went after every grant. They reached out for every partnership. And I guess one thing I'll say to district folks right now, so we get used to working with conservative people in most cases. We get used to working with farmers and ranchers. We don't ask for a lot of money because we're trying to be conservative. Meantime, all these other nonprofits are forming and trying to do what we do, trying to take over what we do. And some of them are more successful because they aren't just thinking so conservatively. So 2 years ago, when we passed a major bill in the state that really took us about 5 years to pass, it's now called the Land of Enchantment Legacy Fund. We have two funds. We have an investment fund and then another fund where the money goes out to 6 natural resource agencies. So we had to partner and give up a lot, because originally we started, it was just going to be for the districts, but it ended up where the environment department, energy and minerals, game and fish, all of them are getting a little piece of this pie, but it also brought on more support. And with that building of those relationships, I ended up even in probably beginning to be uncomfortable situations, going and talking to the Sierra Club or Audubon or some of the other groups who, some of them are not the devil we make them out to be. Yes, we do see some of them that join lawsuits in some cases against our ag producers, which we don't like. But when you sit down and try to talk about putting natural resource, improving natural resources on the ground, you got common ground. You find common ground. And so there were about 30 nonprofits that we all ended up working together. And I would call at least half of them the non-traditional ones. And just for your information, and the folks from New Mexico in here can attest to this, our traditional ag industry groups that I've been a member forever, still am, Farm Bureau and Cattle Boards, they opposed us the whole way through. We ran this Healthy Soils bill. Who could be against healthy soils? Well, they opposed it because of who we were working with, because of these new partners that we had found and brought in. Same thing happened with the Legacy Fund, but they were the only ones in the entire state opposing it, which looked pretty stupid. But some of it was like, well, this is what our policy says. We can't do this or that. And so conservation districts, we're not stuck. We're not stuck in that mold. We don't have to be stuck in that mold. And build those relationships with all of them. Because of that, last year at my state association, I had probably 5 or 6 of the booths were from some of these organizations that my members had never even met before, because they kind of had them over here in a separate box. So, don't judge people, try to get to know them on a personal level, because the more you can do that, that gives you the opportunity to talk about the districts and who you are and what you're doing, and invite them to your board meetings. Try to get people from different sides to your board meetings. Really helps to educate them. So
I think that's a great perspective, Debbie, especially when you start to talk about finding common ground, right? Just because maybe there are things that we disagree on, or that philosophically we're not on the same page, but to come together for a project or for a greater good type of movement, I think that you can really get behind that. And most people can, to say, yeah, we don't always agree, but on this we do. So let's go forward with it. So I think that's a great takeaway for everyone. So let's kind of wrap it all back up in a nice bow, since we were talking about, again, telling our story and how do we talk to people. So if we're talking about our district, how can we use that kind of short elevator pitch as a recruitment tool for new supervisors, for new employees? Does it change? Do you kind of shift the message? What does that look like if we're trying to even talk about supervisor succession?
So yesterday, all this week, we have a booth at the FFA convention, because we started saying we have to reach out to younger people. First day, young lady comes up to our booth. For one, she wasn't registered to vote yet, so they got her registered to vote. But the staff I had there, which actually one of my staffers now is a state legislature. So boy, does that bring in a different, at first I was like, oh, this ain't gonna work. She doesn't have time for us. Oh, no, it works really well, because she brings all these other things to the table. But anyways, she's talking to this young lady, where are you from? What kind of job? And we're also trying to talk about not just jobs you have to have a college degree, but being a farmer, being a rancher, being a welder, things like this. And in talking to her, she said, well, you're registered to vote now. You're 18. You ought to run for the board. So before the conversation was over, after them talking about what the districts do, she's planning on running for the board. So, you just got to get that message out there. You never know, who's going to jump at it and give you the go ahead. But it was pretty exciting to have the first person they talked to say she'd run for a conservation district board. And actually, one of the board members had helped her on her public speaking speech. A lot of you know Brent Van Dyke. He's former NACD president, and he'd worked for us, but he had helped her. So she had that relationship with Brent, who's still on that board. And, she thought it was a great idea. So in New Mexico, you actually have to get on the general ballot. So it's a pretty big deal here now to run. But we made sure they knew the only requirements are to be 18, be registered to vote, and live within that conservation district. So just, keep telling your story and let them know that you welcome them to participate, even if they start out as a volunteer or just come to some of your board meetings to learn what's going on. That helps recruit people too.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. And I think it's really important to be looking for all of us, outside of the traditional board member,
Yep,
maybe. I think there's a lot of
definitely.
people in the community that might be interested in being engaged, that maybe we don't have a touch point with because they're not a producer, if you will, right? They're not coming in
Right.
for technical assistance. But what a great perspective that they can bring to the board for you as you're talking to people. So it just goes back to telling that story again, whether it's someone new in the office or have a booth at a community day or your county fair or your
Right.
FFA convention, whatever it looks like. I think there's a lot of opportunities that are relatively low cost too. Like you don't have to
Definitely.
spend $1 billion on fancy booths and going to like the really expensive shows and those kinds of things. There's a lot of things you can do in the community for free.
Right. Right.
Be active in your chamber, and go there. You meet a lot of interesting people for your economic development or with
So,
the
yes.
schools and FFA and things like that.
Right. You mentioned the economic development, and our districts historically didn't even know who they were, haven't worked with them. This legislator has worked with them. So she basically contacted all of them and said, hey, they these are also political subdivisions of the state. Right now, you work with counties and cities, but you're supposed to be working with the conservation districts too. And they're like, oh
Mhm.
man, we didn't know about them. So this summer, as we're doing region meetings, we've been able to work with the development districts. They're actually paying mileage for our folks to come. They're paying for lunches. They're paying for the rental of the buildings. And as we're moving forward, we're going to be working with them to where they're conducting a lot of trainings, and or in some cases our staff might have the expertise to help do the training. I have a retired BLM director, never written a grant in his life, came on board with us, and I'm like, hey, what do you think about trying to get this National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grant? He didn't even know who that was. 7 or 8 grants later, and every time he would leverage, we get 200,000. By the time we put it on the ground, it'd be $1 million because he knew people with Game and Fish and State Land Office and all this, and we would leverage that money. But then he said, you know what? We shouldn't be bringing these just through New Mexico. We need to train the district employees so they can write the grants. So he has had workshops in our state. At least 2 of our districts have been getting grants from National Fish and Wildlife Foundation for the last couple of years. And if your district hasn't looked at them, look at them. Anywhere you've got some kind of wildlife and the habitat can be improved, there's usually some kind of funding, especially now where we're at, probably not going to have a lot of federal grants available. We've got to look more toward our state or private foundations, but still look through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation because a lot of federal agencies are still going to be putting money through there. And in our case, 7 or 8 oil and gas companies put money through National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. And
Yep.
we were able to bring that money to New Mexico. So yeah, look at those unusual partners. Got ideas, check it out. So
Absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah,
I'm all about unconventional partners. I am, if you have money, let's talk about how we can work together.
there you go. There you go. One of the non-traditional partners that I got to know really well is a guy that works with Audubon. Like I said, he came to our annual meeting. Well, we had an open position on a board here a couple of weeks ago, and it's where he lives. And I'm like, you need to run for that board. And he's like, absolutely. Well, yeah, he's focused on Audubon and riparian restoration, but a lot of the same things the districts are focused on. And so, plus, he does have a little farm, come to find out later once I got to know him better. But
Nice.
he was he's more interested in working with the district because of the habitat restoration projects and the funding things they can do together. So definitely a non-traditional new kind of person that we're getting on this board, but I'm excited to have him coming on board.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I think with Jennifer, when she recommended you, she was like, she's gonna be great. And I love the perspective of, working with all kinds of partners. And I think back to where you were at the beginning, it all comes to relationships and being able to just
All
talk
kinds
to
of
people
relationships.
about what districts do and the benefit that there is, and whether you're talking education, you're talking conservation, you're talking, technical assistance, it doesn't really matter. It's all focused on making the world a better place and working with our producers to make that happen. So,
and Jennifer is a perfect example. Their district does not have a mill levy. They've had all kinds of crazy board turnovers. They've had all kinds of people get on there that weren't producers. But anyways, one little grant workshop, and she got on fire. They've got a couple $1 million contract with BLM now. BLM comes to all their meetings, Bureau of Land Management. And then she went after this tree planting grant that I never even heard of, that she brought to Las Cruces. And it's like $1 million. And so she's having all these tree planting days. And all it took was that one little spark. We've got 2 or 3 employees in the state, actually, from one little grant writing workshop that we did that just took on, because they were like, well, what's the specific language you have to use in a grant? And I say, can you follow instructions? They're like, okay. I said, very specifically follow instructions. Okay. I said, what words did they use when they asked that question? Just use their same words back, because they liked those words or they wouldn't have put them in there to begin with. So
yeah.
It's not that hard, but every grant's different. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, it goes back to knowing people and just getting out there and talking to folks. And I think that's the best thing that we can all do. We don't,
yep.
I always hear people talk about districts as the best kept secret. And I'm like, I don't want to be a secret. Like that doesn't sound good to me.
Shouldn't be.
So,
Nope. Shouldn't be at all.
Well, thank you, Debbie, very much. We really appreciate you spending some time with us today. If you are willing, I will put your contact information too with our webinar. That way, if any of you who are here with us today or watching later on, if you have questions, you can reach out if there's specific questions on, New Mexico programs. I think it's always great to hear what other states are doing. Just because you can be like, can I make that work in my state, or a version of it? Or how did you get to that point? And it's nice to talk to somebody who's been through it. So if there are questions like, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just to say the one last thing I would like, the example I used about a staffer for a legislator. That goes for district employees. The district employees are the most important person in the district. It's not the district board. You guys are the ones that get everything done. You're also the ones that can get information to your board members, or in some cases, keep information from getting to your board members. So having that relationship and supporting the district employees is probably one of the most important things that all of us can do in the United States. So I just appreciate getting to be a part of it, because you guys are the key to the future of the conservation districts, for sure.
Absolutely. Employees are a very important piece of that connection. And I think we all have a fantastic partnership, and the more we can do to strengthen it, the better off we all are, right? So we appreciate having you too as a partner and coming in to visit with us. So yeah, I will post this recording. Like I said at the beginning, it'll probably be beginning of next week when it gets posted to our website and our YouTube channel. So you could check it out there and watch for next month, June 25th. We will see you then. And thank you all for coming today. We appreciate you taking time out of your day and look forward to seeing you next month.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Debbie.